nice and early. All right, so I'm gonna introduce the panelists today, and then from there, we're gonna talk about DevSecOps and how the government should be procuring it. So first, we're going to introduce Dave Fries. Dave is a technology consultant, software engineer, and cybersecurity specialist. Dave has supported all aspects of business development in the DoD and IC, including leading technical proposal responses for over 10 years. He recently served as the CTO of Praxis Engineering, and currently he is an independent consultant to several companies here in Maryland. He is also the Vice President of Scientific Education for FC's Central Maryland chapter and is being recognized later today as a 40 under 40 recipient. And he is also a close personal friend, and we went to the same high school. Tracy Bannon is a Senior Principal Software Architect and DevOps Advisor with MITRE, Advanced Software Innovation Lab. She's been designing and delivering production capabilities for a long time and spends her time solving complex and strategic challenges facing the U.S. government, allies, and partner nations. Tracy is a passionate architect specializing in solution and application architecture, emphasizing cloud-native DevOps, XOps, and DevSecOps, driving collaboration to deliver mission and business value at the speed of relevance is job one. Paul Rizzotti is a team member at Beta Technologies, fostering government engagements as groundbreaking eVTOL company grows. Paul has a fervor for clever acquisition strategies that further warfighter capabilities while stretching the flexibility of contracting and federal regulations. In his previous role, he was adapting and adopting agile acquisition frameworks for Afflicmic, Detachment 12, Kessel Run's, All-Domain, Common Platform, which has proven critical in next-generation application delivery for the Air Force. Paul has been pushing the innovation areas within the Air Force, participating in projects from AFWorks to Mass Challenge. His passion for human optimization and personal development has served him well in many roles within the Air Force and DoD. So Paul, congratulations on the new job, because I think it was this month that you joined this company from AFWorks in Kessel Run, correct?
8 days ago.
So we're going to be picking your brain a little bit there with the reputation that they have. And then furthest to my left, Dr. Danny Sava served in the United States Marine Corps, has 10 years of combat experience and over 22 years of experience in architecting, engineering, implementing, testing, and delivering IT solutions supporting the DoD. He is supportive of higher education certifications, volunteering in support of science, technology, electronics, and math, and always being prepared for what's next technically and strategically. He has 4 degrees, including a PhD in information technology with a specialization in project management. His current role is Division Vice President, Deputy General Manager, and Director of Operations and Maintenance. He was crucial in writing the proposal, delivering the oral presentation, and also standing up the brand new North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, Integrated Technical Warning Attack Assessment and Space Support Contract. Prior to supporting NORAD, Dr. Sava served as the Director of IT Planning, Engineering, and Innovation with U.S. SOCOM, supporting the Enterprise Operations and Maintenance Contract. So we have a lot of experience here in DevSecOps. So I'd like to set the stage and kind of lead this discussion where we're going to define DevSecOps for, because I could ask every single person here what DevSecOps is, and I'm going to get a different response. And then we're going to go into why it's important, and then we're going to go into, the procurement, how should the government be procuring this. So to begin with, I have tremendous respect for MITRE. I believe that MITRE has actually defined DevSecOps, and that's generally the definition, the 10 or 12 page paper that defines it that most people use was written by MITRE. So Tracy, I'm going to start off with you. What is DevSecOps?
All right, so let's put a definition out that we can use for today. Everybody's going to disagree with it, and that's fine. That's 100% fine. Because the number one thing in any organization that you're working with is that you sit down and you make your definition so that you can all be marching in the same direction. So I'm not going to tell you that it's dev mixed with ops. I'm not going to say that. What I am going to tell you is that agility helps business get closer to the developers early on in defining the requirements. But then how do I take all of that goodness that's being defined early and get it out into an operational environment and provide a way for the developers to have direct access? You've seen the figure 8, right? You've seen the infinity symbol. What is DevOps really? It is applying automation. It is leveraging speed. It is leveraging repeatability. It is moving away from having a human in a mix so that you have immutability, so that you can bring value to whether it's the warfighter or the end user, so you can bring value to them faster. Oftentimes people think it's when I snap a chalk line. It's when I commit the code. DevOps starts when I commit the code. I'm going to tell you, and I'm sure we'll argue about it, that DevOps starts when you're visioning software in the first place. So you're thinking about what's the size of the package of the software that needs to be moved across my assembly line in order to get it out into a production environment, an operational environment. So I'm going to stop there. That was really fuzzy, really squishy, and that was intentional.
So Dave, we've been in proposal rooms before, and I see copious notes in front of you.
Always.
Is there anything you'd like to add on, or agree with, or disagree with, Tracy?
Yeah, I'm a proposal graphics guy, so that figure 8 figure. Sometimes when people do DevSecOps, they add like another loop in the middle, and that's really not what you want to be doing, right? Like the security part has to be baked in. I think I go back to Gene Kim's Phoenix project, right? So he talks about a factory floor. Right, that's that assembly line we were talking about. And I need to optimize from raw materials to the product, right? So in software, what does that mean? That's the idea, the requirements, to our users being delighted by our product, right? So how does security work into that? Well, it's kind of like a QA process, right? Factory floor. You could stop the line if there's some kind of QA, security or even compliance issue. Right, same way in testing. So what have we done with DevOps and testing? With DevOps and testing, we've automated the heck out of it. We've shifted it left. And we've tried to minimize the integration points at the end, the manual stuff at the end. So what should we do with security? We should do the same exact thing, actually. Security is just a fancy type of testing. We automate the heck out of security, find ways to do that, processes, tools, and also push it left, do it earlier, right? And then minimize that manual kind of security processes and checks at the end. So that's the kind of things that I want to drive today.
All right, so you ready for me to push back?
Sure.
Yeah. That was
So I don't use the word DevSecOps, and people get really angry at me because DevOps is about that entire process. It is about automation. It is about test automation. It's about infrastructure as code. It's about bringing people together, right? There's an entire cultural aspect to it. The reason I don't add the phoneme in for sec, normally, I will today in this environment, is that it has to be there. If you're not including security as a part of the design from day one, as part of the vision, then you've already failed, because security is just quality. It's just a quality attribute. Cyber, it's not as though it's a separate thing. Now, that shift left and shift right, I say pusha. It's shift both directions, right? It is actually that we need to understand developers are not security experts. But we need to take them from being hobbyists, security hobbyists, because we say you guys need to secure code, you need to write secure code. So we need to enable them up front to be able to design and to implement more secure code. But then we need to use that pipeline as a safety net, because the pipeline doesn't apply quality. The pipeline tests for quality. The pipeline assures quality that the humans have implemented into that code. So,
and Tracy, real quick, so in your head, the idea would be smarter too to also get the pipeline blessed instead of getting individual lines of code blessed later. So with security professionals and getting authority to operate in the things that are necessary on the government side of things, get the entire pipeline looked at and signed off on before they even get going.
Well, and to tie back to something that David said, yes, we can think about code in terms of manufacturing, but there are a lot of really smart folks right now who are going, that whole manufacturing thing, it is predicated on the fact that what you're putting across the assembly line is identical every time, and software is not supposed to be identical every time. In fact, it's about variation, and it's about us being able to control that variation in a cyber secure way. So while it is about having an assembly line, how do you allow that variation? And you're right, it's through that ATOing, it's through that continuous ATO and getting the cyber experts leaning in on the platforms up front.
It's been really difficult on the government side, getting the continuous ATOs and getting the government folk who are comfortable, getting them more comfortable with saying that is an acceptable process and we're okay with you running it, and then trying to get that feedback loop to them to make them more comfortable later that things aren't being broken as code's being committed and then applications are being deployed.
Well, there's probably an entire day that we could spend just debating whether or not CATO is real or not. So.
Doctor, do you have anything to add? And then could you touch on maybe the definition of agile as we move into why this is important?
I think that the biggest challenge for us is that everybody defines that differently, which is kind of what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. For our customer, when they went towards Agile from a traditional waterfall method, they had no training. So we had to do a big cultural shift, not only with our own people to get them to understand why security was important and that it wasn't just the security team that had to do it, it was also every single individual that was putting some kind of code, software or hardware engineering solution in play for that. Then we had to teach the government side who asked for it when we were going into the contract, where they didn't quite understand what they were asking for. Going from traditional project management to the Agile, it was a long journey that we're still on today. And what ended up happening was they took bits and pieces of what they did like and said, we're going to create this hybrid solution. Well, that's a challenge when you're trying to hire to build out your team, where you hire a scrum master that knows nothing about traditional project management, or someone with a PMP that doesn't quite understand the Agile. It doesn't mesh. So when we say define what Agile is, it really comes down to what does that customer expect, what does your performance work statement say, what's your statement of work, and then trying to put all of that together and figure out the puzzle pieces.
Hey, Danny, you bring up a really good point. I had a chance, a couple of months ago to talk with SpaceX. And what was really cool about it was that they came back and said, yeah, we don't use the term Agile. And we don't use the term DevOps, and we don't use the term DevSecOps. What we do is we define a problem, and we get a team together, and we figure out how we're going to surface the work that's being done, how we're going to be transparent about it, and how we're going to enable them from vision to operations, right? And they've got lots of checks and balances in place, and they have a big checkbook to be able to do a lot of really cool stuff. But at the same time, the hype words make it really hard, because to your point, what is Agile? Well, in my definition, it's a transparent backlog that we share, and we reprioritize on a recurring basis. I simplify it that far because even that much, I think scares the hell out of a lot of people when you say that.
Well, especially in the government realm, as soon as you try to break away from one methodology to another, they're like, well, where's my checklist of things to go do? And it's hard to get everyone's head around it. And when you have, like at Kessel Run, there's a lot of disparate teams. People don't realize how large the organization is, 1,500 people, and every team goes about it a little bit differently, which is totally fine as long as, you're correct, Trace, work visibility is top priority to make sure everyone can go and find what it is you're working on, how far along you've come, and what you're doing to get to the end state goals. But in the traditional realm, as soon as you try to explain that to a MAGCOM or somebody that you're working on this stuff this sort of way, it's a loss in translation at best.
I think the fun thing is when they come back and ask you to do EVM. Really?
Right.
Really?
Yeah, well, yeah, how can you show me, yeah, exactly. Well, that's the kind of questions we used to get is, how can you show me that what we've spent money on is worth the value, especially when you're in process.
Right.
Because when you're in process, it's the hardest time to show value.
Well, that's getting away from some of the traditional ways of showing value to newer ways of surfacing value. People don't even have necessarily a definition of value right now. So if I'm going to say that I want to measure by the way that I'm delivering value to the warfighter or to the end user, how am I even defining what value is so that I can track back that I've delivered it? And it actually has to be the business defining it. It's not that I've done 4 requirements and I did it in a week's time. Right. It's tracking back from the value. And I'm sure that you see that too when you're consulting.
Yeah.
Hey, and that's perfect pivot, Tracy. So, why is this important? What value does it bring? What are some problems that you all have worked on and problems that you have solved using DevSecOps. Like, why do we care?
Yep.
Dave?
I think the big thing, and I am going to stick with the shift left security thing because
That's
it's just
okay.
another way of doing bake-in security, which used to be the old buzzword, right? But I think why security DevSecOps, it's important to actually use that term, is because bringing security up to DevOps speed, the speed of relevance, is an important thing to do. So security and compliance can't be a bottleneck, it can't be road bumps, it probably shouldn't even be guardrails, right? It just things that we do. So let's talk about people, process, tools. How can we bring security up to the speed of DevOps? So people, training, cross-training. So this is what Trace was talking about, getting your developers more boned up on security, having your security engineers, instead of being kind of check marks at the end of the process, working earlier in the process. That's shifting left. Integration activities, if we're changing our architectures so that we're working more with containers, microservices, all that integration that used to be manual at the end, now can actually be tested automatically as part of the process, from a security perspective too. So then processes and tools, well, we're going to shift security left, so what does that mean? We got to think about SSPs differently. We're talking about ATOs. If our SSP for our platform or for our software factory is structured differently or accredited in some way separately from the actual apps that are being deployed on them, those SSPs should look and feel different, right? So that's something that we can do differently. Automate wherever possible, that's obvious, right? Container signing, checking, having trusted container repositories is a good idea. Having robotic process automation that's running through security definitions that kind of do a thread through the system. So I think that's why the security part of DevSecOps is important for me, trying to speed up that aspect.
So I'm going to push back, because that's what I do. So containers and microservices are buzzy as well. Are they relevant? You bet they are. But if I'm writing embedded software, I don't really give a hoot about the container because I'm not deploying with a container. I'm not using K8s. I'm not Kubernetes bound. So I always track back when people go, you got to deliver using DevSecOps. No, how about we take a step back and say, what's the problem, and figure out architecturally, because that's what I am. I'm an architect who happens to be an engineer who happens to leverage DevSecOps to deliver into production. So that's not a scolding, that's to say, we got to get some other diverse conversation about it, because you're right. Kubernetes and making sure that I'm scanning those repositories, making sure I'm scanning everything needs to be scanned. Everything needs to be scanned. Everything needs to have visibility. One of the hardest things that I ever did was actually working with the Navy, and we were doing an OTA. And one of the things that I said is, okay, I have to have an RMF package at the end of this, so guys, let's try this a little bit differently. Why don't you guys, to your point, why don't you guys come to the table with me, and instead of waiting until I have a complete architecture totally drawn out, every flow line, every boundary annotated, why don't you come and learn along the way? And I gotta tell you, it was 6 months of banging my head against a wall, because it was a culture shift for them that I thought was gonna be easier for the cyber guys. I thought that they were gonna be like, wow, this is awesome, I'm seeing the sausage making. And what I found to the culture shift part is that it was so foreign, because they're used to getting finished items. They're used to seeing what's done, not seeing what's in flight. So we've got a lot of culture shifting to do. Everything that you're talking about is spot on, David. Everything that you've said is correct. I agree with shifting left and shifting right. I actually want to shift it both ways. But the education, the constant and chronic education of everybody, and the visibility and the transparency is probably the most important thing. Getting those cyber folks to understand, and getting the developers to understand that bi-directional sharing is actually really hard. I'm sure you've run into that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that, Tracy. I'd go one level deeper too. The acquisition professionals that are going to put pen to paper and dollar to requirement need to have an understanding on all the things you just mentioned. One of the smarter plays that the commander at Det 12, Colonel Beachkovsky, did is he reintegrated all the acquisition professionals, contracting professionals into all the product lines. So you have all these contracting officers. Everybody read the book, Explain the Cloud to Me Like I'm 10, and which is a great read if anybody hasn't read it. Yep. But you get these folks that are normally not tech savvy, that's the hugest barrier between getting money from your finance folks, getting contracts from your contracts folks, and getting program managers in a traditional acquisition sense to get things moving is a knowledge gap. So closing that gap by reintegrating all these people with their product folk, with their tech folk, and getting them to understand how things work in a regular be it agile or whatever fashion, but getting them to understand how code gets delivered, how it gets made, and then how it gets delivered, and then how it gets cared for, helps them understand the entire process from the beginning. But also, people always forget about the back end side of that. When you go and drop off containers, nobody knows what's going on, and how do you track spend on that? There's an entire hook that has to happen so that you can make your finance people happy and show them and be transparent. So that's the biggest push to me, is that work transparency, work visibility, but it's on all fronts too. It's on the things that get delivered, and then when they're live and running, all the day two ops, all that jazz has to be able to be seen by everybody so they can explain it to their chains of command and all that too.
Back to the education piece. I don't know if you're familiar with Tori Cuff.
Oh yeah.
She's been working on something called Digital DNA, and there have been a couple of cohorts that go through it. So I suggest go out and take a look. I'll see if we can send out the URL for it. But it is exactly that. It is to make, and it's based on, part of it is based on the explain it like I'm 10 mantra.
Yep.
And I got to help her with one or two of the modules for that. But what I was really excited about was that it was helping the acquisition professional. I call it being tech savvy. So everybody had the same language. They didn't have to become engineers, but it gave them that exposure
engineer.
that they understood what those truly understood what the words were.
They made Digital DNA a requirement when you become a contracting officer at Det 12. They made it a requirement for you to go through as part of the onboarding deal, so that the folks, because if you're coming from a systems background or any other type of background and you're coming into the software environment, it's going to sound like a foreign language, like you just said, Trace. So it's important, and those courses like Digital DNA are really well put together, so good job. Couldn't recommend that higher enough to folks. And the education part is the biggest gap in my head to get everybody onto the same page.
It is, but education's not always in budget.
No.
And you got it, Danny. You said one of the things I heard Mike say is that that's a passion area for you, is the education piece of this. Like, how do we help programs to naturally incorporate, yes, on the job training, yes, exposure by sitting next to somebody, but there has to be time. There actually has to be dedicated time to let me think, to let me read, to let me experiment, to, if I'm constantly and chronically under the gun, to push out code. How do you get that?
So for us, for education, when we do the arts, the Agile release trains, when folks are working on whatever that release train is and complete it, they don't typically go to just the very next train. They'll get a little bit of downtime, and that's where we try to maximize that so that they can actually get the training. We saw a big cultural problem from experience. So we're being levied for our contract for folks that have 10 years of experience in something that hasn't been around for 10 years. So that's obviously a big challenge, because I can hire no one.
Yep.
But it goes deeper than that. When I was a Marine, you had to have experience in a little bit of everything within IT. But now IT has gotten so complex that I have to have an individual person that can do every single aspect. You have to have someone that can do Kubernetes. You have to have a specific storage type of person, a certain type of development. And so that really complicates things. So on my contract, we have a challenge. So if anybody's seen War Games with Matthew Broderick,
yes.
It was filmed in my mountain. And on that, the equipment that you see there is still there today. Back then in the movie, it was nice and white and shiny, and it looks amazing. Now it's being held together with duct tape, and it's a little bit dirtier. So we have that challenge where I have to be responsible for obsolescence. How do we take that software and hardware, how do we take it to the next level on something that really doesn't exist anymore, and there's really no funding to revamp the whole thing. It currently works for missile detection, but we always want to go to that next level, right? What's bright and shiny, and we can't quite get there. So it overcomplicates our mission. It was funny when you're talking about the Phoenix Project. My colonel had assigned it to the group and said, you really need to read this. He went to some conference, and it was an assignment for all the officers, and it backfired, because when we all read it, we said, we can name every single person in this organization in yes. that book. And so we kind of made a joke out of it where he was really trying to be serious. So luckily no one got fired in that endeavor.
I'm finding that on some of the teams that I'm working with.
Everybody knew who Brent was?
There's always a Brent.
Yeah. There's always a Brent.
Yep.
There's a Brent in my family. It's my husband, but his name's not Brent. No, I was going to say that one of the things that you brought up is this need for so much specialization, but at the same time, when I staff a team, when I'm building a team and bringing folks in, I'm looking for a mix of, and they're not unicorns, but I need some athletes. I need some folks who can go across a couple of different things and have a little bit more experience, and then I get the specialists. So I'm trying to mix it up a bit to accomplish what you're talking about, because if I get all the specialists, then nobody knows enough about what each other one is doing, and they're spending so much time. So I kind of have to have that connective tissue, somebody who's one or two folks who are athletic across the different things.
Yeah, I think there's a disconnect between probably my talent acquisition team and then the professionals that actually do the interviews. So someone might be very technically skilled, but if I put all A-team people out there, then I have a bunch of alphas that can't agree on anything, and they go their own pathway. So I don't tell my team this, but I have like an A-team, a B-team, and a C-team, right? So the A-team are those professionals that can really mentor the rest of the group. I try to make sure that they have a security focus for the Agile portion of software development, and then my B-team is more, they kind of go with the flow, they can take direction, but they also are intelligent enough that they can make decisions on their own. And then those C-team people are the brand new folks that I take challenges on. Maybe they don't have a traditional hire background where maybe they're not super technical, they don't have all of the experience, the education, or even a clearance to get that diversity into my team so it balances out for a full spectrum.
So I don't use A, B, and C, but I do the same thing, the same idea. For me, it's all about diversity at the table. All kinds of diversity, right? Left, right, up, down, men, women, whatever gender identification, doesn't matter. But also educational. And that's something that I've hit up against, right? Someone has said to me, yeah, we've got people here who have their doctorates in software engineering and they have it in systems engineering, therefore we have diversity. I'm like, I don't think that's what we mean when we say diversity. We mean a lot of different levels, a lot of different experiences, whether it was commercial before. I'm taking a chance right now on somebody who has no defense at all, zero background. But he's been in industry for 15 years, and he's really good when it comes specifically to AWS. But I'm taking a chance on him. He's also pushing me. He's like, why are we doing it that way? It's nice to have somebody come in and act. Yeah, fresh eyes. Yeah. He's pushing back and saying, that doesn't make sense, you know? It doesn't make sense. Have I gotten complacent and just accepted something? So it's I agree with you.
All right, so, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to shift a little bit, for the back half of this conversation. So we're, we need to get into how are we going to advise DISA and the other folks around here, like, DevSecOps, we've defined it. It sounds great, but there's obviously a disconnect between developing these solutions and implementing them in the government or the government procuring them. We've got a great mix of panelists here. We've got FFRDC. Paul just came out of the Air Force AFWorks. Dave's been in the proposal room for the past 10 years. So I'm gonna start with Dave because you're my buddy. What advice would you give maybe for how the government should be procuring these services and these solutions that they need so desperately?
Yep. So I'd start by thinking about that factory floor again. You want that whole value stream to be included in whatever it is you're procuring, right? So a don't would be, don't have the dev team on one TTO or one contract and have the ops team on a different one, right? That's going to be very difficult to get that blend. And even the security staff, right? If maybe they're government and then you have contractor A, contractor B, that's just a recipe for disaster. Or at least the value stream is going to be hard to optimize because the incentives aren't set up properly. Maybe one way you could do it, take advantage of the new architecture, right? So there's platforms now, there's software factories now. Procure those kinds of things differently than you procure individual apps, right? So the reason that's important, they run on a different cadence, right? The platform has more interconnections, more dependencies, right? Might need to move a little slower because there's a bunch of things working off of it. The apps need to move really fast, right? They could do, everyday deployments, right? The types of people, we were talking about teams and how you structure them and the LCATs and all that kind of stuff. Those will be different for the platform than they would for a user-facing application, right? And also the types of stories are different. We talked about SAFE earlier, so there's architectural runway kinds of issues for platforms as opposed to apps, which are all user stories, right? So those would be my suggestions for that.
How about an FFRDC perspective?
Got a lot of notes, guys. So the concept of platform is really important, and it's another one of those fuzzy words. I agree with you. building and defining a platform is exceptionally different than what I call the feature teams that are going to be delivering on top of it. Because we want to bake in cyber, we want to give them upskilling, right? We want to put safety net around them. So I'm very much an advocate of defining what the platform can and should look like, and then how do we enable teams to build and deliver on top of that. So all in on that. One thing that we constantly forget about is the fact that we ain't building all new greenfield. We're just not. We've got decades of technology, so we got a lot of brownfield. So I like to talk about the fact that we need to be talking olive, right? We've got green and brown. It's not just going to be, we're going to break down the monolith and we're going to use microservices and put them in containers, and love is like a cloud, and we've got unicorns and we have Skittles. That's not really what it is. We have to be thinking about, no, that is. We have to be thinking about, what does the integration architecture need to look like? Linda Northrup, SEI, Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon, said, I think it's about 2015, she said, the worst thing that ever happened to software was Agile. All right, and this is an expert, right? And the reason that she said that is that as we started to glom on to Agile, we said, well, you know what, the architecture is going to emerge. It's just going to emerge. I got news for you, especially in defense. The architecture can't emerge. Maybe the architecture inside a business feature that's going across my platform can emerge, but overall the architecture needs to be thought out. It doesn't have to be big design up front, but it does have to be intentionally thought through. So talked about brownfield, talked about greenfield, so you guys are going to remember, you're talking about olive development, platforms versus capabilities, spot on there. By teams. Right? So go out and procure a team. Don't procure your requirements from somebody and get your testing from another group, because it's very hard to get everybody to merge together. And it creates all kinds of contracting issues, not the least of which is to even talk about the culture challenges you're going to run into. And we still have to get back to the color of money. It still exists. Navy's doing some really interesting stuff right now with some pilots not having a tie to the color of money. And I think, Paul, you had talked about getting away from the color of money too.
Yeah, the new Budget Authority 8, BA08, is there's a pilot program. It's just started in FY22, and Kessel Run's utilizing it, and it basically blends what would be RDT&E and O&M funding, and it gives more flexibility for folks. And as everyone's going to hear, software is never done. Right. So that's one of the reasons to push that. And there's, like I said, a pilot program. If it goes well, hopefully a lot more folks will be able to utilize that budget authority. And I want to touch on one thing you were mentioning, platforms. So I was part of the all-domain common platform inside Kessel Run, which is the best platform on earth, in case anyone's wondering. But
wait, does Nick know that?
So there's a lot of platform wars going on inside the Air Force, and if we're going to be giving advice, as John suggested, one of my advices would be, don't just say we need one platform to rule them all. It's a little bit different because there's an A-10 engine for an aircraft and there's an F-35 engine for an aircraft. They're different aircraft. The all-domain common platform that supports the Air Operations Center inside Kessel Run is a platform for that. And Platform 1 has its own purpose. They don't have to be the same or serve the same purpose just because they're both platforms and they're both funded by the Air Force. As soon as folks start hearing about this is a platform, that's a platform, let's mush them together, that's not how things work technologically. It's not how things work with humans. It's a bad mix. So get comfortable being uncomfortable with some of the technology and how things are moving at different speeds would be my advice to folks as they're gearing up for this big sea change that'll be happening.
What I heard you say is we need to get over the platform wars.
Get over the platform wars. It's okay. We can have more than one platform. And
there needs to be more.
There's more than one. There's more than one streaming service out there, isn't there? Right? No one's like, we need to combine Amazon and Netflix and Disney. No one says that. Why? Because it's fine. There's enough room for everybody. There's enough to happen for everyone. So.
Well, and to the point that David made earlier, there's specialties.
For sure.
I think Danny spoke to this as well. So platforms get tailored a little bit to what they're delivering, right?
And specifically for the all-domain common platform inside Kessel Run, like I said, it supports the Air Operations Center. It supports Day 2 Ops. There's a dozen plus Air Operations Centers globally distributed that it supports. That's different than what Platform 1 does. Neither is better or worse, they're just different, and that's totally fine. Having diversity in technology and diversity in platforms is only going to make things stronger in the long run. Right. Trying to glom them together is a bad plan.
Controlled diversity.
Yep.
So, Dr. Danny, do you have anything to add? And then Paul, maybe if you could play devil's advocate from the Air Force side, I'd like to hear that as well.
All right, so for me, I think that there's a responsibility between government and contracting. It's a shared responsibility. So communicators are really the worst communicators in history, all right? We have that challenge where folks have it in their head, but they don't share the data with anyone, which complicates our decision making. So the government, we often see them go off in a corner and say this is government-only information. Well, we're on the contract supporting you, so if you don't share that with us, then we don't know what direction we're heading. The same thing on my side. My boss doesn't like it, but I'm an overshare, so I will tell my customer everything. I'm not here just for my company. I'm here for the mission, right? We support United States of America, and we support national security for the contract that I'm actually working on. And so I feel like I have a duty to give that information to the customer. So building that trust by communicating goes a long way, because I will get a lot more out of it than trying to close hold something and just being there for the money. The money's great. I mean, we're all here to make money, but really it comes down to that good partnership where you can trust to share certain information. I can go in my customer's office and give that information about something that maybe is not going very well, maybe with a person or with a technology, where they receive that and it's not run off and say that my company's doing a bad job and we're failing at the mission. They give me that opportunity and maybe a little bit of leeway to go out and perfect it, which in the long run really helps them.
Yeah, I'd like to disagree, but I can't. Dr. Danny's spot on. So I couldn't agree more, especially when you get into organizations where the typical setup in an acquisition organization is we launch money, they send back widgets, right? And that's changing across the board. So with drawing the line outside an organization, saying we have contractors in-house and we're all working on the same stuff, Danny's exactly right. We're all in the same canoe. We should be rowing to the same direction. We're heading towards warfighter capability. We don't need to try to punch contractors in the face when they're doing the work they're intending to do if it doesn't go well. So the more transparency, the more sharing there is across the board, government and contractor, I think the better. It does make people very uncomfortable. The radical sharing, the radical honesty does make folks very, very uncomfortable. But to get to where we're trying to go, if we're trying to outpace our near-peer adversaries, they're doing that. We're not. So we need to get on board with transparency. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, in your background, you were a Govy, as I call them Govies.
Yep.
You were a Govy. So I've never been a Govy. I actually came from Maine Consulting, from an SI. I was with Deloitte Consulting, I was with KPMG, and I was outside that. At arm's length, you can't know you're OCI'd. You now, because you helped us think about what the architecture needs to look like, you can't be a part anymore. Stepping into an FFRDC,
it's a different role, right?
A different role, but
Yep.
I'm paid to be objective. I am paid to not compete with industry, and it's been amazing to have direct access to understand, oh my goodness, this is what's happening with that acquisition, and you're right. So I'm coming at it from a completely different side of it, but getting that access to the government right now has blown me away. Over the last couple of years, has totally blown me away how much we could be moving at pace together if we had an ability to better share. There's so many policies that we have to move away from, though, that are going to help that happen.
Agree.
All right. Anything else on advice that you'd give the government? Like, I guess I guess that's the meat and potatoes of the conversation. So
I guess I could help to foot stomp the trust point that Danny, that you made. One of the IC customers that I work with has a model called cost-plus completion-based task orders. And they set out a bunch of completion criteria that really end up being the award fee criteria for the contractor. And they set out requirements, right? And those requirements get bid against. But then at the end of the day, right, say it's for a 9-month period, within 3 months, the requirements have completely changed. So how do you kind of swap those out and be a little bit more flexible? Well, it comes back to trust, right? Is the contractor being fully transparent about what's going on? And if so, and they keep delivering on the ask, it's easy to swap those things in and out because the government and the contractor can come to an agreement even, midstream, right? So that's why that model ends up working if you do have that trust, and ends up being almost more FFP style with swaps and things like that if there isn't that trust. So
that's tough as the government for the first time in a long time is looking to take back technical baseline, right?
Yeah.
So F-35, jet as a service. Hey, Lockheed, deliver this beautiful jet to me, all the software, do it all. And that was the right choice at that moment in time. But as you're taking back that technical baseline, just having a contract that says I trust you is difficult. So there is going to have to be some really conscientious negotiation. We're going to have so many different people at the table during those transition points. I agree with you full-heartedly, especially with the, not full, F-O-O-L, but full, F-U-L-L. I agree that we need to try and figure out how to bake trust in, but there's going to have to be, there's always going to be a contractual aspect to it, always, because the government just can't say, hey, I trust you.
So is there a problem with these, long-term 5-year contracts for software development,
Yeah, the speed of relevance, like Trey said earlier, right? Things 5 years ago aren't relevant today. Today, everyone cares about the migration patterns of Kubernetes, right? That's the buzzword of the day. And if you're going to try to stay relevant, shorter contracts seem to be better. Everyone keeps leaning towards microservices, but you're going to end up with little stovepipes of excellence if you're not careful. That goes back to the transparency thing. And a lot of times, launching a requirement and then waiting for a response isn't helpful. If you're going to try to get into the regular defense sector base, you're going to find those vendors. If you're going to try to get to other like non-trads, it's really hard to get to them because they don't have a Dave writing their proposal.
Right.
They don't know how to get into the room to show you that they can do stuff. Some of the better movements we made at Kesselrun were to have folks come in and give like a demonstration and put out like a challenge for them to write code and then to come in and explain it and break it in person and then repair it in person and stuff like that. And it wasn't so we could say, oh, you wrote the most elegant code. It was really so we could see how they worked as a team, to be honest. It wasn't so we could say, oh, they know how to put this thing together. They could write up an operator and they could get that code out and they could show us how they did it. It was so we could see how they worked under pressure as a team and with our folk, because you put some of your folk in the loop and then you have them work a problem in real time and then you've got something you can judge against. And then the other half of that is when you're doing a contractual action like that, you have to be real careful not to say the money is the key factor, because that's what everybody with a purse string cares about is the money. But if you make that like your third evaluation criteria, you get a better chance at getting someone that's going to be able to do the work you're hoping for, interface and integrate with your team appropriately, and then as long as it's affordable, it seems like it's a good idea.
But do you think that pre-selecting, like working like a blanket, like
yeah,
idea
so
type of thing of having, okay, I've got 10 folks, 10 different organizations that I've kind of micro-blessed for the next 18 months.
That's faster, easier, and it changes your FAR part. So if you're going to go down that route and go with like a basic ordering agreement, Platform One's got a brilliant one, by the way, and you're going to go with a FAR Part 16 agreement, you short-circuit some of the timelines by doing that, and you do have some pre-vetted vendors, and GSA has a bunch of schedules that are available for things like that. They do give you some pre-vetted vendors. It's just hard to know if you've got the very best that are out there because you're not the ones doing the vetting.
Right.
But you can also see who's out there, launch a request for information and see what they do know and don't know, and hopefully get to where you're going.
I love the fact that you really focused on not going with all traditionals. Let's get the ideation is coming out from all kinds of pockets. It takes 5 people with an awesome idea to make an amazing difference right now.
Yep.
Given the technology and how fast things are moving.
Yep, agree.
Yeah, so let's say, it's going to take me 2 weeks. I'm a genius coder. It's going to take me 2 weeks to fix your problem. You're the Air Force. How are you going to procure me for 2 weeks?
That's not an easy question, John.
I know. I mean, that's the problem that needs to get solved. Really, is the contracting. We've had requirements out for 5 years in some cases, and it's just now coming to RFP. For my company, we are 3 architectures ahead now. So how do we streamline this? How do we make this faster? And then we can't have these 5-year contracts anymore for software development. There's I don't know, Flappy Birds was developed in 24 hours. It was a wildly popular iPhone app, right? Like how do we get those folks and procure their services for these sprints and then move on?
If you had shorter contracts with options, because let's say we do contract with you and then it's a good relationship, we want to continue it. It's smart to bake in options, but having shorter term contracts is smart. It's also, if we rewind that furball real quick, to go through a palm cycle to get money, to go down that road, you have to be able to walk that dog and be able to explain how you got to your budget. It's going to be really hard for you to explain to a program element monitor that I need to do 18 small microservice contracts with vendors you've never heard of in 5 years. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's part and parcel to the difficulty. And then those are the folks that are arguing for the budget for the Air Force. So it's not even your program office, it's somebody in DC who goes and tries to wave your flag for you and explain why you need this money. And if they don't do a really solid job of that, your budget disappears. So it's a long-winded way to say it's not easy, but if you could get to a program office that can help you work and have a victory song of this worked well, that carries a long way.
Something that dawned on me while you were talking about that is that we keep saying software, but it's software and software-intensive systems. So there's hardware in the mix, and sometimes we forget about that. So if I want to buy a microservice, to your point, right? There's sometimes where we can project that this can be on commoditized hardware. I don't care what's running underneath it. That's all. I would say that 50-60% of what I look at right now is not that at all, and we're somehow tethered to that whatever that hardware is, especially when we're talking about defense. So I think we have to be cognizant that there is hardware in the mix. We have to be cognizant of the metal as well.
Like GPUs, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just throw some compute at it.
I think there's an additional complication here that if you go to shorter contracts, we're all competing for the same type of people. So when you do the shorter contract, and it's for software development, we take software developers that just have that background and can pick up some new code and be able to develop whatever that program is. But then when the government in our area, maybe Colorado Springs where I'm from, we're all pulling from that same pool where there's only maybe 100 candidates, but there's 500 empty positions. Now we're all trying to just throw money at a problem, and folks don't stick around, long term. What we're seeing is a trend where you get your base year and then you have 4 to 5 option years. So then the government has some wiggle room too. If you're not performing, they can let you go, they can bring in someone else, but they're still getting their work done.
Would you think, Danny, that it might be smarter to get a couple of contractors on board at the same time and almost have a runoff, like a 1 year, like let's say you awarded to 3 vendors, 1 year each, and then at the end of the first year you could decide whom to award next?
You have to be very careful with the way that contract is structured and how you're going to hold folks accountable, because then it just turns into finger pointing and the blame game where we're responsible for something, we couldn't get it done fast enough because we weren't getting the external support from those other companies. It becomes a logistical nightmare.
Yeah, fair.
The way that we're talking about this, we're also talking about humans as though we're applying Taylorism, right? That we can pick up and plug people in different spots, and that's hard.
Yeah.
If we start to think about real efficiency with software delivery, we're also talking about long-lived teams. So if you've got a group together and they're starting to, because there's domain experience that comes with this. It isn't as though you pop in a developer, hey, they've got React.js, they can write my new front end, but they have to understand what the dickens that they're going to be delivering, and that amount of expertise in keeping folks together, I think it's harder to get those long-lived teams, especially when we're competing for folks right now. There's such a void, and we're trying to, I'm working with a couple of universities. How do we get those, bring the next generation in and get them the exposure so that we can have longer-lived teams? But that's a really difficult part right now. So this is, I wish there was just buy this software, do it this way, here's the recipe, and it's going to be easy. This is the most complex situation that I've encountered with all of the nuances to it right now.
So we have 8 minutes left. So how would you write an RFP?
Well, okay.
I wouldn't. I'd call David. And
I was going to say, let me give you a couple of nuggets of things to avoid. So it's also good to know what to do and what not to do. So be careful not to get wrapped around the axle with metrics. You're going to hear nothing but DORA metrics and how many things are deployed and how many things went well, yada, yada, yada. It's much more important to know and have a way to measure what's being used. How many applications are actually deployed and how many of those are being utilized on a daily basis by warfighters. That's the part that matters. That's the part that most people miss. I don't care how many things you got into prod and how many things got launched. I want to know at the very, very end of that value stream, are my warfighters using it? And if they're not, we've got a problem. So step one, John, figure out metrics that you could measure that are worth measuring. So if you're going to launch an RFP, you want to be able to measure something that people can actually get behind and care about.
Not burn down?
No, I don't care
What?
about.
Not
I don't care about.
velocity?
I don't care
What?
about how many stories you've got. I don't care how many get completed per week. I care about what arrives at the hand of the warfighter that person can utilize to make their mission more effective.
That metrics that matter.
Metrics
yeah,
that
it's
matter.
cliche, but metrics that matter, and it's not one metric to rule them all.
No.
It's based on what your role is, where you are in this. Sprint teams, yeah, they care about what their burn down is, but you're right. Flow needs to be those flow metrics, those value metrics, those calculations, those accounting for is it being used and is it what they needed.
And another thing that bake in would be flexibility. So as things get going, it's hard. Once you write a requirement, my requirement is X, Y, Z. As soon as you start unfurling it and you start seeing what's going to happen, it may be it's X, Y, Z plus or minus 3. You have to have flexibility baked in to be able to go with what's available, what can happen, real-time changes, that sort of stuff. Contracts are notoriously inflexible.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
To the point of your question, one thing I would suggest is having a single award for your platform/software factory, whatever that looks like. Whatever everybody's riding on, have a single award contractor for that. Maybe the term limited isn't 5 years, maybe it's a little less because technology's changed. But then potentially for those apps and features, the things that are kind of changing more frequently, you can do multi-award for that, right? So get a bunch of vendors on board and then challenge them, right? Have these kind of bake-offs, right? One thing that Cybercom is doing at Dreamport is they have these challenges where vendors can come in and over a 1 or 2 day period, they're throwing a problem at it. In real time, those teams are fighting against that problem, and the winner is usually clear, and the winner will end up getting a small contract out of it, right? So you could run little challenges for your apps, right?
So David, would you think like a one app, one contract kind of construct? Is that what's going on in your head?
They could be DOs.
Or like a
on
couple
contract.
apps, couple of contracts?
Yeah.
So I love the diversity at the table because I wouldn't say that I agree with a single award for your platform. That point in and of itself. I do think that you can bring together a small group. You don't want to have massive amounts of diversity, but I'm not necessarily a one-trick pony for that one.
I do agree, like the heartbeat of the platform should be long running and stable, though.
Yes.
I agree with David on that.
Yeah. I think that's probably the best way to phrase it.
Dr. Danny?
So I'm going to say something crazy.
I like it.
I like it already.
Yeah.
Do it.
So I think that there's a challenge when we go out and we write a proposal. There's always a requirement of also factoring what that cost is going to be. And in the end, the reality of it is it's going to cost everybody essentially the same amount of money to do the work. You're going to need a certain amount of people. But when we go through a proposal, companies get scared to add the extra 10 full-time employees, and so we subtract that. Well, what that does is it impacts the rest of the contract. It impacts the rest of the team, and now you're dumping all this extra work out there just to save a little bit of money to get that win, and then to turn around and have to go to the customer and say, hey, we flubbed some numbers, we're going to need another $1 million to be able to do this work. Maybe cut that piece out as a requirement from contracting and just make it fair across the board. Give me your solution, tell me how you're going to do this work, and then let the government decide maybe what that final cost is going to be.
I love it. Honesty? Wait, is that what you're recommending?
Yeah.
I like making it at least like third in the list of importance, you know.
All right, so we're coming over to our closing remarks. Is there any last minute thoughts anybody has around the conversation? Let's just go down the line, Dave.
I think we covered a lot of good ground. I'm just going to foot stomp again. Platforms separate from apps, both from a security perspective and trying to get security up to the speed of DevOps are the main things that I wanted to address.
Don't do DevOps. Solve problems using software. Be smart. Put out feelers on ways that you can build trust and test for it. Test against everything that you can test and automate the test.
Yeah, I think earlier we said transparency matters, flexibility matters, and find metrics that are measurable and worth looking at. That's where I'm going.
I always say take care of the people, the mission will take care of itself. So that goes back to the partnership that I talked about earlier, whether you're a government or whether you're a contractor, if you build that good relationship, mission will succeed.
People-centric. Love it, Danny. Love it.
All right, I think that about wraps it up. Here's Tina Jordan.
Let's give them a round of applause. That was tremendous. Now, we asked these folks to be on the panel because of their expertise, but you never know how the dynamic between the speakers is going to be until they get up here. And I think that the interchange was really great, so very valuable. Thank you for that. So, John, thank you for moderating the panel. Excellent job. Thank you, Alicia, for putting the panel together, and to Allison Barlow for all the behind-the-scenes work that you did to make this panel possible. And thank you to our panelists. We appreciate your insights and your experience and all that you shared this morning. Thank you, everyone, for starting your day with us. This is going to wrap up this session. We're going to head over to the main hall E for General Morrison and the morning keynote. Thank you, and have a great FCA day. Take care.
Thank you.